Hello, and welcome to this course on similarities and differences in natural language processing between humans and neural models. As humans, we possess an innate ability to process language. Unlike other cognitive abilities, such as vision, attention, or counting, which we share with many animals, language processing emerged later in evolution and is unique to humans. However, in recent years, artificial neural models have demonstrated remarkable abilities across various linguistic tasks, including translation, question answering, and dialogue. This makes them the only non-human neural systems capable of achieving communication abilities similar to those of humans. In this course, we will conduct a comparative study between neural models and humans to explore both the similarities and differences in how each processes language. The learning objectives of the first lecture are to become familiar with David Marr's 3 levels of analysis in information processing systems, which will guide our comparative study between humans and models. We will define what language models are. When comparing humans and models, we will specifically focus on such language models. We will review the N-gram language model as our first example of a language model. Finally, the last goal of this lecture is to describe neural language models as a special type of language model. It will be useful to recall a theoretical framework suggested by David Marr, one of the founders of the field of computational and cognitive neuroscience, which we will use to analyze and compare neural systems. This framework, known as Marr's levels of analysis, provides a structured way to understand information processing systems, which was originally suggested in the context of vision and perception, but which is also useful in the case of language. Marr's framework comprises 3 levels, each addressing different aspects of understanding how an information processing system works: the computational level, the algorithmic level, and the implementational level. The computational level is concerned with defining the problem or the task that the system is solving and what the system needs to achieve, irrespective of how exactly it is implemented in the brain or in hardware. For instance, it might involve the addition of 2 numbers together to obtain their sum. In this case, we are concerned with what needs to be achieved without specifying how exactly it should be done. The computational problem in this case is the abstract notion of addition, where the inputs are 2 numbers and the output is their sum. This level does not specify the method or algorithm to perform addition. In other words, the computational level focuses on the what and why rather than about how it is performed. The algorithmic level describes algorithms that the system might use to solve the problem defined at the computational level. It is concerned with the step-by-step process involved in achieving the computational goal. For instance, in the example of addition, one algorithm could involve a digit-by-digit addition starting from the rightmost digit and carrying over any remainder to the next digit. Another algorithm could start from one of the numbers and perform counting steps, the same number of times as the other number. This shows that the same computational problem can be solved by several algorithms. We will refer to this property as the one-to-many property. To summarize, the algorithmic level explores the how of the function of the system. Note that it is not concerned about the actual implementation in the brain or hardware, which is the next level. Finally, the implementational level in Marr's framework deals with the physical or biological implementation of the system. It focuses on how the algorithms of the system are realized in real world. For a digital computer, this might involve transistors and electronic circuits that perform addition. In the human brain, this level would involve neural networks that perform arithmetic operation. Here again, there is a one-to-many relationship, this time between the algorithmic and implementational levels. A single algorithm can be realized by many different hardware. To summarize this level, the implementational level deals with the where and in what form the system implements the algorithm. Mark's framework has been widely influential in cognitive and computational neuroscience and artificial intelligence. To summarize, the computational level describes the goals and defines what the system is trying to achieve. The algorithmic level describes the strategies or methods used to accomplish these goals. Finally, the implementational level examines how these strategies are realized in physical systems, be it a machine or the human brain. We can now describe the parts of our course along Mar's 3 levels of analysis. In this part, we will compare humans and models on the computational and algorithmic levels. We will first examine the computational task that an information processing system needs to solve to achieve natural language processing. For this, we will learn about central concepts and theories from linguistics that will help us to understand what kind of computational challenges linguistic phenomena pose to any information processing system. We will then review research work that aim to reveal the algorithms that humans and models use when processing language, and discuss the similarities and differences between them. We will focus on behavioral studies. In these studies, the researchers collect measures such as the accuracy or response times of the participants. They are called behavioral since they study the linguistic behavior of the participants and do not, for example, collect and study the underlying neural activity. In the second part of this course, we will focus more on the implementational level from Mar's framework. We will start by studying to what extent biological neural networks in the human brain and artificial neural networks are similar. Artificial neural networks were originally created and inspired by the human brain. However, modern neural models have been modified to fit engineering needs, which raises the question about their current biological plausibility. In this part, we will also learn about recent research work that aimed to directly compare neural activity of humans and models, using the models as a means to study language processing in the human brain. The last part of the course is about how children and models acquire language. This part does not fall under any of Mar's 3 levels of analysis. However, it can be seen as a fourth, orthogonal dimension concerned with how information processing systems develop over time. Research on babies and toddlers have led to the development of several theories about language acquisition. In this part, we will study about the main findings and theories in the field, and then see whether neural models are similar to children in the way they acquire language. Before we delve into the human model comparisons in more detail, we will start with a background about language models, which will serve as the basis for the human model comparison in the course. We will review several neural architectures used to create language models and discuss their internal dynamics and how they are trained. This background is essential for later stages when we compare language processing in humans and models. We will begin by defining what a language model is and then review the central approaches to building language models. In this lecture, we will review the N-gram model, a classic probabilistic model, which you may encounter quite often also in modern research, as it is commonly used as a baseline model. In the next lectures, we will discuss neural network-based language models, referred to as neural language models for short. Neural networks are of particular interest in this course because their invention was originally inspired by brain anatomy. We will review 4 key architectures of neural language models: recurrent neural networks, also known as RNNs, convolutional neural networks, or CNNs in short, transformer-based models, and state space models. We will cover each neural model in a separate video so you can select the ones most relevant to you based on your previous knowledge. What does a language model mean? Formally, a language model is a probabilistic model of the joint distribution of word sequences in a language. For example, a language model of English assigns a probability to any sequence of words, estimating how likely the sequence is to occur in the language. For example, in the sentence, "The boy smiles," a language model for English will assign a specific value that corresponds to the likelihood of the occurrence of this entire sentence. Given a model for the joint distribution of word sequences, we can also compute the probability of a word given its past or context. For example, given the beginning of the sentence, "The boy smiles because he is," the language model will assign probabilities to all possible completions of the sentence. If it's a good language model, it should assign a higher probability to happy compared to angry, and a value in between for the word surprised. To model, for any given sequence, the probability distribution of the next word, the model must learn quite a lot about language. Specifically, it needs to capture semantics, the meaning of words, and syntax, the structure of sentences, and to understand how to accurately combine the meanings of individual words. A model that can predict the next words in various contexts would therefore be a remarkable achievement. To better understand the difficulty of predicting next words given a context, imagine that we provide an almost complete detective story to a language model and asking it to predict the next word after "and the murderer is." If the language model is as skilled as a sophisticated human reader, able to guess the correct ending, then the model has not only learned semantics and syntax, but also reasoning. So, although next word prediction might initially seem like a relatively simple task, it could actually be very difficult and in practice hard to learn from data. Only in recent years have language models achieved performance on par with that of humans. Having a good language model could be very useful. There are several applications based on language models. For instance, one widely used application is autocompletion for email messages. Given a language model and the beginning of a sentence, email applications suggest the most probable completions, which facilitates and speeds up message writing. Another application is in speech recognition. In this context, the task is to generate text based on a sample of speech acoustics. One of the challenges is analyzing the acoustic signal, segmenting it, and extracting relevant features. However, relying solely on acoustics to solve this task could be very hard. Speech recognition can be significantly simplified if the most probable sequences of words in a language are known. A language model can provide this information and thus narrow down the space of possible solutions. Language models are also used in question-answer systems. In these systems, given a question, the model needs to provide a meaningful and accurate answer. A language model can analyze the user's question, examine the knowledge database, and generate the response. Finally, another application of language models is in brain-computer interfaces, also known as BCIs. BCIs are tools developed to enable direct communication between the brain and a computer without using any intermediate medium such as speech or typing. One important application is for patients with conditions like locked-in syndrome. These patients are completely paralyzed and cannot produce speech. In severe cases, they may not even be able to use tools based on eye tracking. BCIs can provide them with a mean of communication by converting neural activity in the brain into text and sounds generated by a computer. The task here is to map neural activity signals to words. As with speech recognition, the main challenge is analyzing the raw signal, which is neural rather than acoustic in this case. However, a language model can greatly facilitate this task by providing knowledge about the most probable sequences of words, significantly narrowing the solution space. We will now explore the first type of language model, called the n-gram language model. The n-gram model is a probabilistic model, and unlike neural network models, which we will discuss later, it is non-parametric. The main idea of n-gram models is to estimate the probability of a word given its context based on counts from a training corpus. Specifically, the probability of word wn given its context w1 through wn-1 is estimated based on how many times the sequence of words w1 to wn occurs in the training data, divided by the count of the preamble sequence of words w1 through wn-1. For example, we could use counts to estimate the probability of happy given the context the boy smiles because he is. For this, we would need to count the number of times this sentence appeared in a large corpus divided by the number of times the preamble of the sentence, without happy at the end, appeared in the corpus. However, as you may have already noticed, this could become quickly infeasible due to the curse of dimensionality. The curse of dimensionality refers to the need for an enormous number of training examples when learning highly complex functions. As the number of input variables increases, the required number of examples can grow exponentially. In the case of language models, the challenge arises from the large number of possible word sequences. For instance, with a sequence of 10 words drawn for a vocabulary of 100,000 words, there are 10 to the power of 50 possible sequences. Language is thus said to be open-ended. From a finite set of words, our vocabulary, one can, in principle, produce an unbounded number of sentences. Therefore, relying solely on counts to solve the problem is insufficient. To address this problem, n-gram models approximate the probability of a word given its history rather than computing it entirely. Before we see this in detail, let's use the following notation for convenience. Instead of writing the sequence of words from w1 to wn, we will write w1:n. Now, using the chain rule of probabilities, the joint probability of a word sequence can be rewritten as a product of conditional probabilities. Then, following a Markovian approach, each conditional probability can be approximated by neglecting words that are far in the past. For example, a bigram model approximates the probability of a word given its entire context by considering only the most recent word. Similarly, a trigram model ignores all words in the context except for the most recent one and the one before it. In general, an n-gram model ignores all words in the past except for the last n-1 most recent words. Let's take the bigram model as an example. In this case, we approximate all conditional probabilities in the product by considering only the most recent word in the context. Each conditional probability can then be estimated from counts in the training corpus. Note that the sum in the denominator represents the marginalization across all possible words in the last position, which essentially corresponds to the count for the preceding word wn-1. This yields the expression we discussed earlier. Importantly, in the bigram model, we do not encounter the curse of dimensionality since the counts include only sequences of 2 words. Estimating these counts is therefore feasible, even for relatively large vocabularies. In general, an n-gram model can be computed based on counts following similar considerations. In the case of an n-gram model, the counts involve sequences of n words. The larger n is, the more accurate the approximation will be. However, feasibility decreases as a function of n. The largest feasible n should be determined based on available computational power. We can now define neural language models. As we saw, language models are probabilistic models that capture joint distributions of words in language. Neural language models are language models that are implemented with a neural network. As such, neural language models are a parametric model, unlike the non-parametric n-gram model. The parameters of the model are the weights of the neural network that need to be learned from the training data. The common setup for neural language models is to train a neural network on a next word prediction task. One of the main advantages of this setup is that it does not require labels for the training samples, which are usually slow and costly to collect. Scanning the training corpus, the model is given a sequence of words as input and is asked to predict the next one in the corpus. This setup is therefore known as self-supervised learning, in contrast to supervised learning, which requires labels. During training on a next word prediction task, the neural network therefore learns to approximate the conditional probability of a word given its context. As we saw, to succeed on this task, the neural network needs to learn a lot about semantics, syntax, and more. At the end of the training process, the neural language model can be used to process and to generate new sentences based on the statistical relationships among words that were captured by the model during training. To summarize, the 3 levels of analysis in Moore's framework are the computational, algorithmic, and implementational levels. They describe the computational goal, the way to achieve it, and the physical substance to carry it, respectively. Each level has a one-to-many relationship with the level below it. Language models are probabilistic models that capture the joint distributions of word sequences in language. A language model also provides the probability of a word given its past context. A model that can accurately predict future words must have learned a lot about various aspects of language. N-gram models are classic non-parametric language models that, based on Markovian assumptions, approximate the conditional probability of a word given its context by counting occurrences of shorter word sequences in the training corpus. By this approximation, they overcome the problem of curse of dimensionality. Finally, we saw that neural language models are language models implemented with neural networks. These are parametric models, and their parameters, the weights of the model, are learned from the data during training. In this video lecture, you learned what language models are and that they can be implemented with a neural network. Next, we will review several of the main neural architectures used for creating language models, such as recurrent neural networks and transformer-based models.